Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Welcome to Lu Jia Zui Forum 2010. Tonight's chapter Huangpu, Evolution of the International Monetary System, US dollar, euro, and renminbi will start now. Please take your seat and set your mobile phone to mute or vibrate mode. Thank you. Please take advantage to our chair, Mr. Jeff Dell.
Hello, yes, can you hear me okay? Seems to be working. Well, good evening. My name is Jeff Dyer. I work for the Financial Times in China in the Beijing office. First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much to the organizers, Shanghai government and Fang Shanghai, for inviting me to take part in this fantastically high-powered forum. It's very flattering to be asked to be involved in this. I think it is possibly one of the most interesting forums we have here this evening. Our subject for this evening is the future of the international monetary system. Always an interesting topic, fantastically topical at the moment, given that we have a G20 summit starting tomorrow. We've had the Chinese government deciding to change its exchange rate policy this week, and we have the very fast-moving situation in the European financial system as well, all of which are going to have a big bearing on how the eventual international monetary system ends up looking up in the next decade or so. Just to set up very briefly a little bit of what we're going to talk about today. The financial crisis has really brought to the fore the whole question about the future role of the US dollar is going to be. People are inevitably asking questions about whether the dollar is going to retain its, as a store of value, retain the confidence that it once had, and whether it can play a sufficiently role in providing liquidity to the financial system and helping balance of payments adjustments. So that's the big issue that's been circling around these types of discussions since the financial crisis started. But there's also a couple of other very big questions that have come to the fore over the last year or two. The first thing is obviously the endless rise of China and what that means for the sort of role the renminbi might play over the next decade or so in the international financial system. Can the renminbi really internationalize, and how long will that take? And does the Chinese government want that to happen in the short term? And then more recently, the crisis in Europe has also brought to the fore lots of questions about the euro itself, starting out as a sovereign debt crisis, particularly in Greece, but a lot of people expected it might end up as some sort of European banking crisis. And so we'll hear a bit today about whether the euro can still retain its role as a credible reserve currency. So that's what we're going to talk about this evening. Let me very briefly introduce our speakers. We have a fantastically high-powered panel of speakers. We have policymakers, academics, some people who do a bit of both, and some very well-known private sector commentators as well. And in no particular order, I'll very quickly introduce them. I'm sure most of them are very familiar to a lot of you anyway. But we have Mr. Xie Duo, who's the director of the Financial Market Department at the People's Bank of China. Mr. He Dong, who's an executive director at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority. Richard Portes, who is a professor of economics at the London Business School. Ha Jiming, who is the chief economist for China International Capital Corporation. Andy Xie, who's the managing director for Rosetta Stone Capital. David Li, who's the director for the Center for China and the World Economy at Tsinghua University, and is also now a member of the Chinese Central Bank's Monetary Policy Committee. And finally, on the end, Robert Offel from the French Central Bank, the Banque de France. So those are our speakers for this evening. Just very briefly explain the format. We have a big panel, 7 speakers. We only have 90 minutes this evening. It is, after all, Friday night. So I'm going to ask the speakers, please, to keep their remarks very brief. I'm going to ask everyone to make a brief statement about their particular thoughts on where they think the international monetary system is going, but I'm going to ask them to keep it very brief to 5 minutes so that we have plenty of time for questions and answers, because I'm sure a lot of you have lots of questions you want to ask our panel, and I certainly do as well. And then one final housekeeping issue before we kick off with the first speaker. If I could ask you to keep your mobiles on vibrate or silent. And also, at the risk of sounding gratuitously hypocritical, I'm going to have my mobile here. It's not because I'm expecting a phone call, but it's because I forgot my watch, and so I'm going to time the speakers by looking at my mobile. So if I'm not checking my emails if I look at my mobile. I apologize. Anyway, over to our speakers. I'm going to first call on David Lee Da-Quay, to give us his particular thoughts on the international monetary system. David.
Well, first of all, it's a tremendous honor for me to come here to be part of the Lu Jia Zui Financial Forum, which I understand started last year, and I regrettably missed last year's forum. And also, I can't help but noticing that Jeff, you're not particularly following any order, any ranking order in the Chinese community like this. We usually go with officials, with xie duo, or usually we go with people from far away, like from our French friend or our British friend. Anyway, so I don't understand why you start with me. Anyway, so also today I do want to follow one rule, that it is rule of democracy. I notice that there are more speakers who are more comfortable with Chinese than with English. So with your permission, may I switch to Chinese? That way we can have more effective communication. How about that? Okay, then we can. So sorry for people who cannot understand Chinese. So with that, let me talk the substance. Okay. So 我现在讲中文，因为咱们晚上来的人呢，我看啊，还是讲中文的，愿意讲中文的人多一点，好不好？就委屈我们的外国的朋友们了，好吧？关于这个国际货币体制，我想讲这么几个观察。第一个观察呢是，除非在紧急情况下，任何的国际货币的体制都是一个市场的众多的机构、众多的交易者不断的博弈，逐步的演进出来的一个结果，是个演进的结果。除非发生重大的变化，有什么战争啊什么的，一般情况下，这是我的一个基本的观察。那么基于这么一个基本的观察我自己的一个简单的判断是这样子的：是欧元欧元呢，既然它成立的时候经过了多番的讨论，主要是政治上的一些运作，那么欧元的今天，我想也不至于由于当前的市场的波动而消失甚至于我还可以愿意再补充一点讲，我说2年以后、3年以后，欧元区不仅不会缩小，可能还会基本上按照原有的计划继续的扩大。那么这个结论的基本的原因是什么呢？基本的原因呢是说，现在的欧元区的危机在我看来，在很大程度上是被我们的金融市场夸大了。是经不住仔细的推敲的。如果把这5、6个出现了问题的欧洲国家的债务情况仔细拿来分析的话，我想除了2个国家，其他的国家基本上问题不太大。这2个国家有问题的是什么呢？是希腊和葡萄牙这2个国家确实有一定的问题，只不过这2个国家规模很小，咱们先暂时搁到一边。西班牙、意大利这个爱尔兰，还有这个这3个国家基本上问题不大。西班牙的问题，西班牙虽然财政赤字非常高，可是西班牙的整体的债务水平并不是太高，将到70%，而且西班牙有大量的外来的劳工，他们对西班牙的财政的这个负担并不是很重。这是西班牙的情况。意大利虽然债务水平很高，但是注意到意大利的私人部门的储蓄率是很高的，长期以来意大利的私人部门是愿意购买意大利的国债的。那么爱尔兰的问题是，它最近1个时期以来营救了2家国有银行，所以财政上出现了短暂的问题。所以我相信，只要欧洲能够挺住这一关，当然我这个观点也是班门弄斧，要跟我们法国的和英国的同行们进行请教，用中文说是抛砖引玉是吧？我的观察是，只要欧洲能够挺过这一关，只要 ECB 欧洲中央银行能够部分的采取美联储的这种救市的方针，也就是继续扩大 印钞票的力度，把一些呆账暂时的接管过来，欧洲的金融市场的信心能够得到恢复。那么2到3年之后，等到欧洲 GDP 增长速度能够恢复的话，那么财政赤字水平就有所恢复，就能够减少。所以欧元，我相信也许短期内还会对美元、对其他货币有所贬值，但是从中长期来看，还是完全有理由继续存在，而且能够回到一个比较高的一个兑换的汇率水平。那么最后说人民币的，在我看来，人民币国际化是一个不可回避的不可避免的一个历史趋势。我们可以讲很多原因，但是我想强调的是，这么一个历史进程可能需要一定的过程。简单说来，现在我们可以提供给境外的人民币的持有者所能投资的金融工具还是少得太少，不管是香港还是境内都太少了。所以人民币结算我们可以扩大，但是问题在于外国的机构拿了人民币之后怎么办？他没有渠道投资，所以这些方面呢，我相信我们的政府会想方设法逐步的放开，或者是发挥香港的作用，或者是进一步的开放我们上海的市场。总之会有一个办法，逐步放开我们对境外投资者的投资的渠道，通过这种方式让人民币在境外能够流通起来，不仅流通起来，而且还能够回到境内进行投资。那么经过10到10年左右，或者10到15年的运营，我觉得我们应该能够期待人民币逐步能够成为一个和日元、和美元、和英镑和欧元逐步可以在国际市场上相抗衡的一个国际货币。谢谢。
Thank you very much, Lee Dakwe and David Lee. So David Lee thinks that the renminbi is, over the next decade or two, going to become an international currency compared to the euro. I'm going to turn now to He Dong from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, give us his views on how it looks from Hong Kong, the possible internationalization of the renminbi. He Dong.
Thank you, Jeff, and many thanks to the organizers for inviting me here tonight. I think I will stick to English since we have also quite a few friends coming from abroad. So maybe just to balance David's Chinese, a bit. But I think, Jeff, let me concentrate on your question whether the Chinese government actually wants the renminbi to be internationalized. I think in the public discussions and also in the literature so far, most of the analysis basically focus on the question whether renminbi has a good prospect of becoming a major international currency, maybe a decade or two down the road. I think that's certainly a very interesting question, and my understanding is that, as David mentioned, that international monetary system evolves very slowly, and it will take quite a long time for the renminbi to play a much larger role, internationally speaking. But it doesn't mean that we cannot proceed step by step to make a renminbi more acceptable internationally, or to be used more extensively outside the country, even though it's not a major reserve currency. Okay, so here I think based on Hong Kong's experience, since I work at the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, I know from first-hand knowledge, from these policy steps that the mainland authorities have taken, maybe we can observe from these policy actions what the policy intention is. That's the first question I want to address, whether they are interested. The second question, I think there are lots of interesting issues, and many people have asked the question, what is the path towards renminbi internationalization? In the sense that, is it possible for renminbi to be internationalized when China still runs current account surpluses, and when there are still capital account restrictions intact or still being in place for a considerable period to come? Now, so these are the three questions I want to touch upon. Now, the first question, I think, basically, from Hong Kong's experience, I think the government's intention has been evolving. In the beginning, when Hong Kong started renminbi banking, for example, in 2004, at that time, there were renminbi cash notes already circulating outside the country. So at that time, I think the intention was more modest. That is to get all the cash out there in the economy circulating out there back into the banking system. So, for example, the People's Bank will understand better the monetary statistics, how much renminbi is out there. You know that actually tourists could at that time take renminbi cash notes outside for example, tourist spending outside the country. So that was the initial sort of policy objective, but it has evolved. For example, in recent years, particularly last year when the government announced that they would make policies to facilitate the use of renminbi in trade settlement, then we had basically a big breakthrough in Hong Kong's renminbi banking, the business scope. So that basically says, I think what it showed is that the government is interested to make the renminbi being used as a settlement currency outside the country for foreign trade between importers and exporters, located in both China and outside China. Now, this, of course, came from a worry that there might be systemic fragility associated with the use of one predominant reserve currency in the global system. For example, at the height of the global financial crisis in the third quarter of 2008, after Lehman failure, there was dollar shortage because there was the banks were scrambling for dollar liquidity. Of course, this had a very damaging effect on global trade. Global trade basically collapsed in late months of 2008, in early months of 2009. So that was a sign of the systemic fragility of this of the use of the dollar. But of course, even I think for the American governments, this is not necessarily a good thing, because basically the Fed also had to come to the rescue. They had to set up all the swap lines with other central banks. So this basically says that we may probably have to do something about the global financial monetary system, even from the perspective of just making the trade more resilient to disturbances in the global financial system. So I think the mainland authorities, based on Hong Kong's experience, certainly are interested in a broader use of the renminbi in international trade. Whether they're interested in it becoming a major reserve currency, that I think is too early to say. But certainly from our own experience for trade settlement, I think that's obvious. Now I have only 1 minute left, but I think on the last question in terms of the path toward internationalization. So basically, I want to make a case that it is possible for a currency to be used internationally, actually quite extensively, even though the economy runs a current account surplus. So basically, you can do international, you can allow the currency to be used internationally through the financial account rather than only relying on trade deficits in the current account. Okay, so that I think that debate is going on, but I think I can make a fairly strong point that I think that's the case. It doesn't depend on China running a current account deficit for renminbi to be used extensively. Okay, so that's the question. The last question, whether it's possible for renminbi to be used outside China, even though China still has a lot of capital restrictions. I think the answer is also yes, because we can use offshore markets like in Hong Kong for for non-residents to use the financial markets in offshore markets like Hong Kong to do financial transactions. But it doesn't mean that these offshores can be totally cut off from onshore markets. There will still need to be linkages. For example, the offshore financial institutions have to have access to settlement balances maintained with onshore banks. But these can be arranged in a way which is consistent with China's capital account liberalization strategy. That is, you have partial restrictions on certain types of transactions, but you can have fairly liberalized treatment in terms of other transactions in various forms, for example, in the form of certain qualified institutions. So I think basically the last point I want to make is that a gradual path towards internationalization of the renminbi is consistent with a capital account liberalization strategy that has been described as proactive, gradualist, and controllable. So let me stop.
Thank you very much, Dong. I'm now going to open the floor to Roberto Fell from the Banque de France. We heard from David Lee earlier that he was very optimistic about the outlook for the euro for the next, at least if not this year, then in the years after that. Maybe you could talk about it from your perspective.
Yeah, very much share. Thank you. I very much share the view expressed by David Lee, and I thank the organizer to invite a European central banker in order to confirm that the euro will survive. A few months ago, the question was how long will it take for the euro to supplant the US dollar? Now the question is how long will it take to the euro to go under? The markets are very volatile. And that's strange. Let me tell you that in my view the euro will survive and will come out of the crisis stronger. Just to remind you a few simple facts. First of all, the exchange rate of the euro is currently well above its long-term average real effective exchange rate. It's actually around, depending on the way you calculate that, it's above 8 to 10% above its long-term average. So, and remember that the value of the euro was 1.18 when in early 1999, where we launched the euro, and it was under the parity during 3 years. So now it's clearly not a problem, and the market itself has tell us clearly that the euro will survive. The second fact is that the euro zone sovereign debt is lower than the sovereign debt of most other developed countries, both by its size compared to the GDP and by its rate of increase. This year, no, not last year, but this year, sovereign debt will represent around 85% of the Eurozone GDP, when the ratio will be 90% in the US and more than 200% in Japan. So during if you take the last 10 years, the ratio increased by 16% of GDP in the Eurozone, by 35% in the US. And even if you take Spain, which now is currently under pressure, its debt to GDP ratio will only be 63% this year. 10 years ago, it was 59%. So if you take the situation of the banking sector, actually the crisis in 2008 has proven that the European continental banking sector was very resilient. No big French or Spanish or Italian banks have been rescued during that time. Perhaps it's due to the strong capital base, or to an adequate supervision, or to the specific business model based on universal banking, or even in some cases on bank insurance conglomerate. There are many reasons, but the fact is that there wasn't any problem. So why do we have a European sovereign debt crisis and renewed tension on European bank fundings? Actually, it's a welcome wake up for us, for everybody, and it was time to make some swift decision. And clearly, some commentators have highlighted how discordant policy announcement in Europe have contributed to the turmoil, but it should not overshadow the strong and unambiguous responses that have been taken by governments and central banks in Europe. I will not bother you with all the decision, but the backup facilities which have been decided, and lastly the agreement to make public or a result of individual stress testing is clearly the sign that in Europe we can have a very swift response to our problem. Nevertheless, we are now embarking in Europe and in other developed countries in fiscal consolidation, and fiscal consolidation is a very tricky exercise. Timing is of the essence, and depending on this timing, you could either trigger negative Keynesian effects or positive Ricardian effect. And when we are entering in this new age of austerity in Europe, that carries its own risks, and it's very important at that time that we implement the G20 framework for strong, sustainable and balanced growth. And it will require changes in behavior in many countries, but also in the developing countries and in China. And I will mention that structural and financial reforms that could increase domestic demand in major emerging market economies and increase real exchange rate flexibility in these emerging market economies are keys in order to foster growth at the G20 level, and we definitively need that in Europe when we are entering this fiscal consolidation. Okay.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'm going to turn now to Andy Shea from Rosetta Stone Capital. We've heard some very optimistic views about both the medium-term outlook for the euro and for the gradual internationalization of the renminbi. Andy, maybe you could share your thoughts with us.
Okay. Thank you. I think that we're having this discussion here because that there are a lot of people in China care about the status of a renminbi in the global economy, and there's a feeling that if renminbi could become a major currency rivaling the US dollar, it would be a symbol of the rise of China. So it's more like people looking at this from the political perspective, and we talk about the monetary system and the currencies a lot. Unfortunately, I think the conclusion is still the same, that the dollar remains dominant. And I'll come back to this point, why this is so. And let me start by saying that what's the problem with the global monetary system? It's not which currency is up or down, who's dominant and who's not dominant. It's the monetary authorities abusing paper currencies to stimulate the economy, to bail out the financial systems. And this is so far it's to me it's shocking that the people are still holding all these paper currencies. And you look at the dollar. The dollar was pegged to the gold at $36 per ounce. Now it's just 1,250. You look at how it's going to go. It will be like 5,000 or so. So why people are holding all these paper currencies? Because they have nowhere else to turn. So we have a generation of central bankers who have no respect for the value of currency. What they're doing is that they're doing whatever they can get away with. And they're trying to achieve other objectives. And so that I think that the seed for more and more crisis. The crisis happens. You can point at a specific situations like on Wall Street, subprime product, all these CDOs, CDS, and so forth. But things like these happen every 10 years or so. The reason it happens is because the central banks do not care about the value of the currency, because they think that if the whole thing blows up, I just print money and bail all your guys out. So now we are reaching a different stage of things. Now you used to be bailing out of banks. Now we're talking about bailing out of countries. Like in Greece now, maybe Greece next, maybe Portugal. But after Portugal, why should other countries say that? Oh, let's not borrow money. Let's live like a good citizen, save money. No, one day Germans will wake up and look at the Greeks, say they are having a good life. I'm having a terrible life. So I should be like the Greeks. I should borrow money too. So imagine that. One day Germans wake up, reach that conclusion. What happens to the currency value? Nobody's responsible. Why should you be responsible? So I'm afraid that we will, as long as that the central banks keep talking about the stimulus, and people get Nobel Prize for doing research like that. And instead of looking at the value of the currency, respect the value of the currency, people hold on to the currency, and they have worked hard for the currency, and it's a job. It's the responsibility of the central banks to preserve the value of the currency. And everything else is secondary. As long as that we do not have that, I'm afraid we'll continue to have a currency crisis and a financial crisis. I think that because the last time they bailed out everybody, I think the next crisis is not too far away. Now the second issue is that which currency is on top. And I think a lot of Chinese people like to discuss who's on top. And I think that there's no doubt the U.S. dollar is on top. But it is really the soundest currency in the world. It's not really. The U.S. dollar is being depreciating against all the other major currencies for the last since its dominance. So it really doesn't matter if from American perspective, if the dollar devalues, so what? It's been going on for so long. It still hasn't shaken the dollar's status. So I think that that thing ends only one day. Well, it doesn't work anymore. But so far, I don't see that, because Europe is not a unified country. A currency needs to have backed up by a large economy and a strong government. And Europe so far lacks at least one condition. So I don't see that the dollar will be replaced by euro anytime soon. So global trade and the commodities all continue to be valued in U.S. dollars. That gives the U.S. an advantage. So they can issue debt, bonds, and print money, and pass the cost to the whole world. So of course it's to the benefit of the United States. It will continue to do so. So expect the dollar to continue to devalue in real value. Of course, I'm not saying that other currencies will appreciate. They probably now everybody has figured out we all should devalue. So the only people that will be hurt are the people who hold the currencies. Now the last comes to this the global role of the Chinese currency. And He Dong raised the interesting point is that even though the Chinese government talks about it and the Chinese media talks about it, and there's a real question about if the government really wants renminbi to be international. And I think the answer is probably not yes. For a currency to be a major currency, global currency, i.e. that financial transactions happen in this currency, and for central banks hold reserves in your currency, you need minimum condition is the currency needs to be convertible. And all the decisions China has done is to show it has no intention to do so. Whatever RMB internationalization measures being announced all have caps. And that's consistent with China's philosophy that the market economy is not a completed market economy. It's always within the bird cage. And the government decides how big the cage is. So outside of the cage, there is no free market. So whatever you like QFII, there's a cap. Whatever, if we have another announcement, there will be cap. You look at the amounts of money involved, they are quite small relative to China's aggregated money supply. So in my view, that Chinese government is not ready for that, and there are good reasons for that. Okay. For if the currency is convertible and traders can push a button and billions can come in and out, you must have a very strong system. It's not just the real economy. You need to have very sound and flexible financial system. China's financial system is government owned. It's basically the Chinese banks are like government ministries. So I'm not sure that when they will become real banks, but it will take a long time. So this sort of without a market-based financial system, it's not possible to have a convertible currency. So we need to first to see reforms there. But if we want to have a good financial system, we need to have the rule of law for private ownership. Otherwise, things change every day. How can you be sure? How can you hold all assets here? So yeah. So let me finish. Basically, China is like a Chinese currency, Chinese economy. I believe will become very large. In 15 years, it could be the same size as the U.S. economy. But for Chinese currency to be like the dollar, it requires first we need to have the legal reforms to make sure that the private property is respected. And the disputes are settled through the court, and that people can trust, not through government officials. This is the first condition. Second condition is the financial system needs to be privately owned and market-based. I think before that, when we talk about the internationalization of the renminbi replacing the dollar, it will be premature. Stop here.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to turn now to Richard Portes from the London Business School. Richard, we just heard from Andy that the dollar is going to remain dominant, but central banks around the world are playing games with the values of paper currencies. Do you share some of his pessimism about the future for the international monetary system?
No, I don't. And is this mic on now? Yeah. And I'll tell you why. But usually when I speak in the evening at this sort of time, people are sitting there either waiting for their dinner and they're impatient to get to their dinner, or else they've had their dinner and they're impatient to get to sleep. Now, fortunately, tonight neither is the case, and I'm very pleased to be here. The two questions I want to talk about are, first, whether there is an alternative dominant international currency to the dollar, and second, would a system in which, say, the dollar and the euro shared the major roles of international currencies, would that system be stable? The problems with the dollar are well known. Never before have we had the central currency in the international system be issued by a country which is deep in international debt, very high net debt to GDP, and which is still running a current account surplus, deficit rather, and whose deficit actually is going to increase as we come out of the recession. Is the euro a plausible alternative? Well, here I agree with David Lee and Robert Ophel that the euro is not going to collapse. The euro will remain number 2 in the foreseeable future with deep financial markets, It runs a current account, essentially a current account equilibrium. It's going to go into surplus fairly soon, but it has disadvantages. The framework for financial stability, the regulatory framework, is fragmented, not really a good, sound framework in my view. There is no clear lender of last resort authority in the euro area financial system. There are no ex-ante burden-sharing rules for cross-border financial institutions if they get into trouble, and we've seen cases like that in this crisis where things worked out rather badly. And the European Central Bank itself is not keen to see the euro replace the dollar as the main currency in the international system. And then finally, we have the recent events of the Greek crisis and so on and so on. I think those will be resolved, even if Greece does, as I believe it will, have to restructure its debt. It will not go out of the euro area. The euro area will remain a stable system. What about these special drawing rights? The governor of the People's Bank of China, a little over a year ago, made a case for giving them a bigger role in the international system. Well, their share, even with the new allocation, the share of the special drawing rights are only 4% in international reserves. That's not going to grow much. It's a unit of account, essentially, and it's only a unit of account between governments and the IMF. It has no role in the private sector. There are no bonds in SDRs. It's not traded, so it can't be a vehicle currency. The IMF can't actually act as a central bank behind the SDR. It can't issue itself liquidity, so that in practice, if you need an international lender of last resort, it's the United States. And we saw this in the Mexican crisis. We saw it in the original Latin American debt crisis in the 1980s. We saw it with Brazil in 2002, and we've seen it, as was mentioned before, in the currency swaps of 2008, 2009, which gave international liquidity to the system, as He Dong has said. So what about the renminbi then? Well, I agree. There is a trend towards internationalization, but it's going to take a very, very long time. You would need, and Andy Shea, I agree with him, I didn't agree with him on much, but I agreed with him on this, that you would have to abolish capital controls and thereby become vulnerable, much more vulnerable, to sudden spikes in capital inflows or outflows. You'd need exchange rate flexibility, serious exchange rate flexibility. You'd need a mainly private banking system. You'd need a transparent and independent monetary policy. And you'd need a much deeper development than we see now of financial market instruments, of financial institutions, and of the regulatory apparatus. All this takes a long time, I can assure you. And I think we're talking about decades, not years. So the dollar and the euro will continue for decades to be the major international currencies. And maybe, I think, probably in about 10 years or so, they'll be pretty close to equal. Now, would such a system be stable? That's the final question I put to you, and the answer is not obvious. Charles Kindleberger, the great economic historian, claimed that the experience of the period between the First and Second World Wars showed that a system without a dominant currency, when the pound sterling and the dollar were co-equal, that system was inherently unstable, and that you needed a currency hegemon, as he put it. Well, in fact, crises have actually been more frequent since the dollar peg regime of Bretton Woods broke down in 1973, more frequent than ever before. There are some advantages to having a multipolar system. If the crisis, as I believe, the current crisis, has its roots in huge capital flows to the United States, which overwhelmed the capacity of even the sophisticated American financial system to deal with them, it would be good to split those capital flows up and not to have them all focusing on the United States. I believe that having multiple international currencies would impose more market discipline, in particular on the United States, but also on the Europeans, on the euro area. I think the financial globalization process would be more symmetrical than it has been, not dominated by a single country and its investment banks and so on. And finally, the United States would no longer continue to benefit from the so-called exorbitant privilege of being able to finance its deficits in its own currency without limit, as far as the eye can see. Now, that said, and I finish with this, and it's a very serious problem, to have more than one major currency requires agreement on consistent policy choices among the issuers of the major currencies. And here, in the fullness of time, we will be talking about the dollar, the euro, and yes, ultimately, the renminbi. With the pound sterling, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen still playing a smaller role in the system. How can you get that kind of consistency of policy choices? We certainly are not seeing it now. And that, I think, is the nature of the problem that is facing us going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Let me now turn to Haji Ming. We just heard from Richard that he thinks the euro and the dollar will remain the dominant forces, and that probably is going to be a stable arrangement, but that needs a lot more policy coordination between the two. Maybe you can tell us your thoughts, Ji Ming.
Okay, as promised, I will talk a little bit about euro and the dollar, probably more about the RMB. And I agree with Professor Potus and Professor Lee on their long-term views about the international financial or currency landscape. But I'm not going to talk anything that's going to happen 15 years from now. I would like to discuss the currency and exchange rate issues from a market perspective, largely short-term views. I think, well, after this crisis, if you look at all these countries, all these currencies are not going to be worth as much as before. So I think no country is in a position at this moment to let its currency appreciate sharply. When you compare these countries of major currencies, in the past, when you want to judge which currency is going to go up, you look which economy is stronger. Now you have to look which economy is less weak. And this is I think this is in a way echoed by Andy's view. All these currencies, paper money, there's just too much of it. But however, exchange rate is a variable in relative terms, so we still need to compare the subpar economies and to choose which one is relatively better. I think there are three major determinants in exchange rate. One is the pace of growth, economic growth, and the second is the country's the size of current account deficit or surplus, and the third is the country's fiscal position. And on all these three accounts, if we compare the US, Europe, and China, probably China is better. And even in the foreseeable future, China is still going to be more solid. In terms of growth, no doubt China is growing now still close to 10% compared to low single-digit growth in the US and Europe. If you look at the fiscal deficit, the size of fiscal deficit in China this year, probably it's going to be 2.8% compared to double-digit in some European countries and very high single-digit in the U.S. If you look at the size of current account, China's current account surplus, though much smaller than a few years ago, still quite sizable compared to a very sizable deficit in the U.S. and much smaller surplus in the European countries. So I think there might be a case that the RMB is going to get stronger in the longer term. And I think it's very good for China. Not only that this could leave China consumption to play a more important role in driving its economic growth, and I think it will also achieve a more geographically equitable growth across the country. With the value of currency going up together with wage rates, I think more firms will try to relocate themselves from the much better developed coastal region to the less developed coastal region, where marginal propensity to consume is probably much higher. So this could drive up the overall level of consumption in China, and it will also reduce the regional gap between the rich coastal region and the relatively poor hinterland. And also it will urge many of these firms that are producing low value added products to move up the value chain to produce something that has a high value that could be made to compete with countries of much higher per capita GDP. Because over time, if you still produce these low value added products, over time your competitiveness will be eroded. Some other low income countries will definitely beat you. So there's no future in producing low value products. So I think there are a lot of benefits behind a stronger RMB. That being said, I do not expect to see a very sharp increase in the value of the RMB because the world economy is going to slow. The US is going to slow. The European economy is going to slow. China itself is going to slow. Look at the US. After the fiscal subsidies, the effect of subsidies, stimulus start to peter out, I think the US overall economic growth will probably turn to low single digit, very low single digit rate by the end of this year. It's going to be higher at the beginning of the year, 3%, but probably approach to below 2% by the fourth quarter. In Europe, I think a lot of the less developed European countries are going to cut their fiscal deficit, and they have to tighten their belt, very tight belt. Even in the more advanced European economies, there's still a need for them to cut their fiscal deficit. I think a number of countries have already taken the action, Germany, the UK. So domestic demand in European countries are going to remain weak. But we know Europe and US are the largest export destinations for China. So it will inevitably impact China's exports going forward. So then if you look at the trade or current account surplus in China in percent of GDP, do you know how much it is now? Trade surplus in China in percent of GDP in the first quarter was 1.2%. Current account surplus in the same period was 3.5%. Then you go back to check the two numbers in 1998. I tell you, the numbers now are lower than in those in 1998, at a time when the RMB was actually facing a depreciation pressure. You may think it's an irony, but it's a fact. So that's why I'm saying you're not comparing which country is stronger, you're comparing which country is less weak. Probably China is less weak, and the RMB in the future, I think it will trend up, but in the short term, don't expect to see a very high appreciation. I think in the next few months we're going to see a slowdown in China's exports and a slowdown in the global economy, and this is due to the shrinking of the stimulus effect. I think last year, about the same time when we were in this room talking about the global economy, my prediction that the world economy should follow a U-shaped recovery. But of course, all these governments in the world do not have any tolerance for a U-shaped economic recovery. They all poured money to form a W-shaped recovery. But I think a W is even worse than U. If U stands for ugly, W is simply worse. And I think we are now facing a second downturn leg in this W-shaped recovery. And this is more painful than just simply lying down on a horizontal line. So I think in the next few quarters, we're going to see some very significant weakening in the global economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jiming, for very interesting insights and what a stronger renminbi means for the pattern of Chinese economic development. I turn to our final speaker, Mr. Xie Duo from the People's Bank of China. Now, I did commit a diplomatic faux pas earlier by not asking Mr. Xie to speak first. He did ask to speak last, which gives him a bit of a chance to reflect on some of the things we've heard so far. We've heard some rather diverging views on the prospects for the euro, generally a consensus that the dollar will remain dominant. We've heard a lot about the internationalization of the renminbi, but a lot of speakers also thinking that maybe the Chinese government isn't quite so keen on the idea. We've also just heard from Jiming that he thinks there'll be a very, very slow pace of appreciation. So anyway, if I could turn the floor open to Mr. Xie Duo.
Thanks, Jeff. And it's my honor to be here to talk about the international financial system, especially the financial monetary system. I agree with other friends, the Hedong and the Jiming and Andy's and Professor Lee's argument for the international monetary the system. Before my job, the director Journal of Financial Market, I work in the international department of PBOC. I also attended the last year attended the different international conference. But when our delegation attended the London summit, G20 summit, the leader of G20 agreed to implement one mechanism we call the peer review of G20 country. The main reason behind this the suggestion is after financial crisis, we should solve the imbalance of problem of the world economy. But after then, all this G20 country make the big effort to try to solve the imbalance of the G20 country. Unfortunately, until now, we still face a lot of problem. So in this process of imbalance the problem, we found that this is a very long time the issue. We need to solve the imbalance, but it's not easy to solve because the people after financial crisis, the people from the different country understand actually in long term the international or the economic structure have a big change. A lot of the economic the power gradually shift from the western to the east, especially the Asia. In so many the emerging market, the economy size gradually become larger and larger. So you cannot use the currency as the policy, the measure to solve the imbalance, the issue. So in the long term, you will find in some the emerging economies such as China, India, and Brazil, and other the big emerging market, their economic size gradually become larger than before. On the other hand, you also found Asia country have a very high saving ratio. So in real economy, you found the imbalance. But in the financial the side, I think the other a lot of the economists not emphasize on the imbalance of the financial side. Gradually, you found that the U.S. dollar cannot play some role as the reserve money. So this is why the emerging market economy quite emphasize the more balance on the financial side. For instance, we raised the question about the quota, the distribution among the international industry country and the developing country. We ask the question, increase the voice of emerging the market in international department institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. But it's not easy to achieve such objectives, so it will take a very long time. But you will find with the shift from the economic the power from the western to the east, gradually the emerging market, the currency will play much more important role in the future. So you cannot purely depend on the U.S. dollar and the euro to solve this problem. So this is why we also suggest reform the international monetary system, such as the enlarged the SDR component, such as we suggest gradually the SDR will be more widely used. We also suggest we should reform the IMF system. For instance, we cannot purely use the quota system. We suggest we should set up the reserve, the pool. The IMF should reform the financial resource instrument. This is one part of the story. We need gradually to change the international monetary system. Otherwise, we cannot solve the imbalance of the international economy. But the second part is the renminbi. I fully agree with Ms. He Dong said. It will take a very, very long time to realize the renminbi international. It's not so easy. But on the other hand, we still have a lot of the work to do, especially in the real economy. Now China is a big one, or maybe big two, in terms of the trade, the foreign trade. So when the financial crisis is deepening, you found a lot of the market demand on the renminbi as the trade currency. So this is why the PBOC and other the Chinese government agency to support the renminbi as a trade the currency. So gradually, the renminbi definitely will be more used abroad, including Hong Kong and other Asia countries. Another the issue related to the trade currency is how to create the market for the renminbi, satisfy the demand for the keep renminbi the value. Nowadays we encourage the Hong Kong the monetary authority and other financial institution to develop the financial institution instrument in Hong Kong and other, especially in the Hong Kong area. For instance, we will encourage the Hong Kong financial institution issue the debt and issue the lending to the company. So gradually, I think the Hong Kong will be gradually become more important the offshore the financial market in terms of the renminbi, the trade. On the other side, you know, you cannot 100% cut off the link between the Hong Kong market and the mainland the financial market. So this is why we also will offer some channel to allow the company abroad, especially in Hong Kong, the company and other financial institution invest in domestic market. So we will try to give more liquidity, the instrument for this company and the financial institution. So you cannot see this is the capital account the opening is 100%, but gradually definitely with the trade account liberalization, the capital account liberalization also be follow up. So finally, I think that we will get a more free trade the renminbi in both the abroad market and the domestic market. So that will be very, very good for the futures, the renminbi in the futures international financial market. Finally, we also hope one day the renminbi will be put into the package of the SDR. So we still need, I think the SDR is a very good instrument to solve the dollar dominate the reserve money the problem. So this is why we work currently. So thanks, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Xie, for a very succinct and interesting description of the PBOC's view. We have about a half hour left. I'm going to open it up to questions to the audience now. I'm just looking to see whether we have any microphones or not. We do have some microphones, yes. I believe. Do we have? I'm not sure. It doesn't look as if we do have microphones. I'm going to ask if you could speak very loudly when you ask your question. I'm going to go over. Yes. I'm going to start over here on the right wall, the gentleman in the black jacket. Yes, we do have some microphones. Perfect. The gentleman in the black jacket by the wall. Thank you.
Thank you. 我是那个上海东方早报的记者，想问一下那个谢多司长还有李稻葵那个委员，就是两个问题。就第一个是，就是马来召开嘉陵会议上的话，就是美国和英国以及欧盟对于就是说削减财政的看法是不一致的。那个英国和欧盟因为就是说自身的困境要削减财政，但是美国认为这样做的话可能会导致一个那个经济衰退的风险，不知道你们怎么看？然后第二就是，目前您怎么看？就是说大宗商品维持高位的情况，因为尽管存在的世界经济二次探底的风险，但是那个国内大宗商品的价格的波动还是比较小的。它是不是因为2018年底以来，就是各国就是美元和欧元的多发的话的导致的那个货币贬值已经在大宗商品市场上已经表现出来了？谢谢。
David, do you want to take that question?
请谢多司长，国际司的老司长，他最熟悉这个情况，好吧？谢多司长。
Mr. Xie, then.
我回答第一个问题吧，请那个李教授和那个两个问题之间，就是关于财政问题，实际上我刚才也谈到了，就是实际上经济结构是一个世界经济是个长期转型的时期，所以在第一轮经济危机中间呢，大家看到是私人部门的赤字呢，已经出现了问题，那么逐渐的这些私人部门的这个赤字呢，要转化为由 这个欧美的政府赤字，所以在当前这个阶段呢，这个欧美国家的赤字的问题呢表现得特别突出，也是在今年年初以来呢对世界经济威胁的这个增长的一个威胁。那么实际上问题的本质并没有发生根本的改变，那么根本的问题还在于欧美国家的经济结构与世界经济的这个发展的趋势是不相吻合的。那么解决这样一些这个结构性的赤字的问题呢，需要相当长的时间。那么在这个中间就涉及到第二个问题，就是您刚才谈到的这个，就是美欧之间关于赤字的问题。那么我刚才也介绍到，就是实际上在关于G20国家曾经希望呢有这样的一个政策的协调，可是实际上呢，我们知道在这个各个国家呢，由于所处的经济环境，这个各方面的这个状况都有所不同，所以呢，对这个政策的反应呢。当然会有这个不同的，所以在这方面呢，出现一些矛盾呢是自然的。那么这也就是之所以为什么在这个危机以来这么多次的举行了这个这样的这些峰会。那我这里还要特别强调的一点，就是当前世界经济呢，已经从由发达国家这个主宰的这样的一个格局，转为了呢，就是世界经济问题不能够单纯由发达国家所解决。那么这也就出现了，就是为什么要由G20这样一种机制来重新代替。那么就是说，包括欧美这个经济的问题呢，大家也可以看到。那么在这中间呢，如果没有亚洲国家的这样一种强而有力的这个经济的增长的话呢，我想欧美经济的这个所遇到的困难呢，也是更大的。那么从这一点来讲呢，我认为呢，这个在当前正在多伦多举行的这个G20峰会上的这种国际经济协调呢，恐怕是非常非常必要的。那么这种协调不但存在于欧美之间需要一个协调，同时也要使发达国家和新兴市场国家有一个更为有效的这个协调。我想这也是当前国际经济的这个政策协调中间的一个新的格局。谢谢。
David, do you want to take up anything on that?
谢多司长讲得非常全面了，我就补充2个很小的观点。第一个观点呢，就是刚刚我们法国的中央银行的这个我们同事讲得非常好，就是当前欧洲的问题啊非常微妙。怎么微妙呢？就是从短期来看，它不应该进行财政的收缩。短期来看，财政的收缩对短期的经济增长肯定是不利的。但是资本市场又需要看到一个可信的、可以兑现的、长期的财政的收缩的计划，所以需要一个长期计划、可信的计划，但短期你不要缩减。那么这就是非常微妙的一个难题了，需要解决。所以这个 G20的会议非常重要，在这方面看看咱们拭目以待，能不能得到一些结论。关于第2个观点呢，补充一点，就是这个大宗产品的价格居高不下，我看有2个原因。第一个原因呢，还是刚刚我们安迪谢国中刚刚讲得非常好，货币发行量非常大，有大量的游资寻找投资的去向。目前呢，发达国家的股市并不是非常的火，所以需要寻找投资渠道。第2个重要原因就是现在的世界经济增长已经转换了火车头，已经由发达国家转向了中国呀、印度啊、巴西呀、南非啊等等新兴市场国家，而新兴市场国家急需自然资源。所以这2个原因在我看来会将使得我们的大宗市场产品的价格在未来一段时间继续的持高不下，甚至于上升。
Any more questions, please, from the audience? There's a lady in a white shirt about halfway back. Just here. Thank you very much.
你好，我是来自新华社的记者。就是有一个问题，就是在那个央行的，就是汇改重启的时候，央行网站上说这个人民币进一步这个推改人民币汇率改革是有助于抑制这个通货膨胀的这样一个压力。但是我们看到人民币汇改的消息经传播后，就是整个国际上面的反应是油价还有包括大宗商品的那个价格都上涨。那么这样看来，这个人民币汇改对于 CPI 到底是有一个什么样的效果？第二个问 问题就是之前那个何东先生说到这个香港的人民币就是这个离岸中心和他说是和那个内陆不能切断关系，主要是因为香港的这个银行和大陆银行的之间在结算方面的联系，而那个谢多先生说这个香港的离岸这个金融中心和上海离岸中心就是和内陆不能分开，是因为内陆也可以开一个小的口让这个人民币回流。那么在这个问题上，就是这两个离岸中心如何协调，就是两位在认识上是不是有更多的可以阐释的地方，还有包括这些人民币回流如果是到这个国内的股市啊，还有这个债市方面，是不是需要能够把它区分开，还有一些哪些难点需要突破。第三个问题就是说这个跨境贸易人民币结算现在是等于是全球都放开了，那么这样我们在跨境这个资本监控方面有没有新的举措和就是新的这个来更好的监控，以防它这个热钱的更多的流入啊，或者是这样。谢谢。
Thank you very much. Mr. Shea, do you want to take the first question there, I suspect?
First question. 关于人民币汇率机制调整之后，世界经济世界市场上的变化呢，应该多方面的观察。首先呢，决定金融市场的因素，每一天甚至每一个小时都在发生着变化，很难呢直接确定就是当日或者当周的这个变化和某一个经济政策的这个变化或者调整直接相关，这是第一点我要想说明的。第二点呢，就是在人民币汇率这个机制宣布调整之后呢，我想整体反应呢是正面的。您刚才说的非常对，就从长期来看呢，人民币汇率的调整呢将有助于中国经济向更加合理的健康的一种结构的这个转型。那么这中间的对短期市场和中长期的市场的影响呢，确实不同的投资者有不同的理解。我想呢是应该这么说，就是首先呢金融市场上的投资者呢可能是从更加确信中国政府对于这个中国经济的发展更具备信心，因此呢对于中国稳定持续的这样的一种增长的态势呢就更具备信心。那么这个对于稳定全球的这个大宗商品市场，我想这是一个最积极的这个正面的这个作用。那么当然这中间呢这个从这个货币的原理来看呢，这个我们也看到这次人民银行在声明中间也明确的确认，就是实际上呢这一次呢只是在弹性方面的调整，从经济的各个方面，刚才我们这个哈博士也谈到了中国的这个经常账户的这个赤字的这个比例大幅度的这个降低，这也是这个确认就是人民币没有这个大幅升值的这样的一个客观的这个经济基础。所以从这一点来看呢，这个我想呢对这个汇率的影响，对大宗商品的这个影响，我想投资者也会做出一个自己客观的这个判断。我想这就是对您的这个第一个问题的回答。
Thank you very much. Hodong, do you want to take up the second question about settlement issues in Hong Kong?
这个就是譬如说境外市场和国内市场这个关系啊，首先最基本的就是说，如果境外的银行和境内的银行没有它的往来的，譬如说这个清算关系的话，那境外市场不可能存在的。所以这是第一层次的，就是这是非常基本的。这也是为什么在香港发生这个就是开拓人民币业务最早的时候呢，必须要有人民银行来提供一个清算安排。那么随着这个业务的发展呢，就是说海外的人民币资金是不是应该回流到国内的市场？这个和刚才我表达这个观点，就是说这个国内的这个资本项目的开放啊，它是应该是一个有序的过程。那么国内的政府的表述呢，是一个应该有主动性、渐进性和也是可控性的。那么在这个过程中呢，我觉得现在在做非常多的研究，就是说什么样的资金回流到以什么方式回流到大陆是比较风险比较小的呀？比如说我们可以先在香港可以把 把那边的债券市场甚至股票市场这个用人民币可以先发展起来，但是同时也可以让一些资金，譬如说以这个直接投资的方式回流到大陆啊，这个直接投资我们都知道它的风险的控制可能比这个债券啊或者股票投资可能要好控一些。这个我觉得是一个动态的过程，现在很多专家都在进行研究。至于政策方面，这个我就不太清楚现在讨论到什么程度了，就是至少在研究方面我知道这个工作现在在进行的很紧密。好，谢谢。
Thank you very much. We have time for a few more questions. A gentleman in a grey shirt, about a third of the way back. Thank you.
谢谢。我问2个问题，一个问题是问李大奎先生的，请问这个在这个最近宣布的这个人民币汇改重新启动的这个过程中，这个货币委员会在这里面起了什么样的作用？还有就是这个时机的选择，是为什么在这个时间做这个事情？还有就是它会不会跟这个就是它的这个主要目的是为了贸易平衡呢，还是为了人民币的国际化？这是问李先生的一个问题，我也还要再问谢先生的问题，就是说，对不起，是何东先生，对不起，就是今天我们在这儿是讨论这个陆家嘴论坛，我们知道它是为了这个上海国际金融中心的建设这个服务的，它有这样一个目的。我也知道您在刚才的谈话里面在很多内容是讨论香港这个离岸中心香港金融的建设，特别是香港人民币离岸中心的建设，您对这个未来的这个上海金融中心和香港金融中心这2个中心的这个之间的关系特别是他们的竞争关系能不能有一个描绘？谢谢。
David, you want to take that first question?
非常简单，我想告诉你中国的货币政策委员会是一个政策咨询机构，它不是一个政策的一个决定的一个机构，这是明文的规定的，是公开写在白纸黑字上的。那么政策咨询委员会呢，这个货币政策委员会呢，在这个整个的货币政策的决定过程中呢，是起到一个提供建议的作用，包括人民币的汇率的改革的问题。那么所以呢，我只能作为一个学者告诉你我的理解，这一次的汇率的调整的主要的目的，在我看来主要是推进中国的经济结构调整，主要是加快发展方式的转变，确实如此。那么这件事情呢，和你刚刚问的那个时机也是紧密相关的。在我看来，完全作为一个学者，作为一个这个非决策者，是个学者，在我看来，这次时间的选择，我应该称之为水到渠成，是基于政府对整个中国经济形势以及对国际经济形势的基本判断之上的。这个基本判断是什么呢？基本判断是中国经济已经基本上走出了金融危机的阴影，而世界经济的基本的恢复的态势没有因为金融危机的，没有因为欧洲危机的欧洲债务危机而改变。因此中国经济的首要任务是结构调整，是发展方式的转变。那么这次的改革推出，就意味着我们过去22个月的应对金融危机的那个过渡性的短期的危机的政策已经结束了，我们回到了汇率体制改革的我们已经过去这个2005到08年被证明为行之有效的改革的通路上来了，所以我们是重归改革。
And Dong, do you want to pick up the second question about Hong Kong and Shanghai?
非常简短，就是我觉得这个中国经济的这个强劲的增长大家也可以看得到，就是中国经济是一个非常庞大的经济体系，在这样一个庞大的经济体系里面，譬如说有2个主要的国际金融中心，譬如香港和上海，这个是非常自然的事情。所以从这个就是这个饼做得越来越大的话，非常就是说这对2个地方都有很有好处的。那么我觉得也各2个地方2 两个城市都非常有自己的特色和它的优势啊。比如说像上海有这个非常庞大的一个这个腹地来支撑它作为一个非常大的国际大都市，这样发展金融中心的前景是非常美好的。那么香港呢也有它自身的优势，因为它毕竟也是在一个不同的体系里边，它是一个普通法体系，然后它的金融中心已经非常成熟了，所以很多国际投资者呢也很自然的愿意运用这个香港这个平台甚至继续把它作为进入中国的这样一个这个窗口啊。所以我觉得在这个将来呢，可以看到，只是随着这个中国经济金融市场的不断的开放这两者的这个受益的机会都是非常大的。那我们可以想象，比如说你可以想象像纽约和伦敦的他们这种他们的也是有很多的竞争合作关系的，但他们也有不同的特点。比如说纽约呢，它是一个主要的是支撑像美国这样一个庞大的这个金融体系的，它和一个是它内部的金融需求，然后呢，它也是和这个非居民和美国居民之间的这个通过纽约这个市场进行。而伦敦呢，它是一个主要是一个用非居民之间进行美元交易的。大家都知道，其实美元的这个市场在伦敦这个市场上主要的交易的这个货币是欧洲美元呢，是美元而不是英镑。所以这个就是说，这种各种模式呢，都给我们带来探索将来这个香港和上海在中国这个金融改革和经济发展中，他们各自扮演什么一个角色。总体来说，我觉得可以比较很好的判断，那就是说这两个城市，他们作为国际金融中心的这个前途都应该是非常好的。谢谢。
Thank you very much, Don. We have time for one more question. There's a lady in a black top about halfway up for our final question.
My name is Gladys from Hong Kong Thai Business In-Depth. We'd like to divert the question to Mr. Andy Se. As Hong Kong Monetary Authority has relaxed the rules for the corporates to raise bonds in renminbi, we'd like to know, although so far no corporate has done so, we'd like to know, is it a way for Chinese government to internationalize the renminbi? Is it the first step for China to do so? And do you see any potential advantages or benefits for the corporates to raise renminbi bonds in Hong Kong? Thank you.
Andy.
I think that Hong Kong wants to have a substantial renminbi traded financial market, and there's a desire there, and but I think it's very difficult. It's extremely difficult, and the Chinese government is still not sure about the financial security with all this money in and out, and with all these crises that have happened, have strengthened this view that the opening financial system is bad for the country. So I think that so that's why I think coming to this question of issuing renminbi bonds in Hong Kong, I think when Hong Kong goes to the central government and says that I need something, the central government tends to say yes, but they always want to put a cap on it, and the amount would be quite limited. So I think that there will be some bonds, renminbi bonds in Hong Kong, but I do not think the market will ever be liquid. And I think the bond market will be inside China, will be here, and Hong Kong will remain an offshore financial center. The financial assets will be traded in foreign currencies, not in RMB, despite what the Hong Kong government is striving.
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's after 9 o'clock on a Friday evening. It's getting very late, and more to the point, the Brazil game of the World Cup is going to start soon. So we're going to call it quits for the evening. I want to thank you all for coming along to the session, and I would like you all to please thank our excellent panel speakers for this evening.